The scream echoed across the savanna, sharp and desperate, shattering the calm of the afternoon. Clara fought against the river's strength, her arms flailing uselessly against the treacherous currents. The icy water pulled her body downward, while the riverbank grew farther and farther away. Despair swelled like a knot in her chest. Every attempt to cry for help was drowned out by the deafening roar of the rushing water. The sky, once blue and serene, seemed to darken with the shadow of death looming closer. She knew this was predator territory. Crocodiles lurked in the depths, and hippos, notorious for their aggression, could appear at any moment. Her heart pounded frantically. The weight of her backpack, packed with camera equipment, dragged her further down, making her struggle even more desperate. She tried to unfasten it, but her fingers, cold and trembling, refused to cooperate. This can't be the end, Clara thought, her mind overtaken by panic. Her eyes scanned the riverbank, searching for any sign of help, but all she saw were the tall trees, still and indifferent. She screamed again, one last plea, as she felt her strength slipping away. And then she heard it, a roar, deep, powerful, and close. The sound reverberated across the savanna, silencing even the birds. Clara froze, adrenaline surging as she felt a primal fear she had never experienced before. A lion. That roar could only belong to a lion. Her wide eyes darted frantically, searching for the source of the sound. Amid the tall grasses, something moved. First, a massive shadow. Then, the rays of sunlight revealed a figure that seemed to have stepped straight out of a nightmare. Nero, a colossal lion with a golden mane, his amber eyes glowing with an intensity Clara had never seen. He stood still, staring at her, as though assessing the situation. Clara felt a chill run down her spine. She was trapped between two deadly dangers, the treacherous waters and the king of the jungle. Her screams had drawn the predator to her, and now there was no escape. What would he do? As the current continued to drag her, Nero took his first step toward the water. Clara held her breath, her heart pounding in her chest. He approached with an eerie calm, his muscles rippling under his skin as he walked. And then, something inexplicable happened. The lion didn't roar again, nor did he lunge aggressively. On the contrary, he stepped into the water, his paws breaking the river's surface with determination. Clara, stunned, couldn't believe what she was seeing. It was as if Nero understood the danger she was in, and against all the laws of nature, he had decided to help her. From that moment on, the fight for survival took an unexpected turn. If you were surprised by what happened with Clara and Nero, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. The story is just beginning, full of suspense and emotion. Nero moved through the water, each deliberate step defying the current that seemed determined to carry Clara away. His eyes were locked on hers, and though Clara trembled with fear, something about the lion's demeanor made her hesitate. He didn't seem hostile. He wasn't roaring or baring his teeth. Instead, his imposing presence conveyed an inexplicable sense of protection. Yet, doubt gnawed at her mind. What if he changed his mind? What if he was just waiting for the perfect moment to strike? Clara felt the force of the water pushing her further and further toward the center of the river. Her arms were numb, and exhaustion was taking over. She tried to stay afloat, but the backpack still strapped to her shoulders dragged her down like a lead weight. She knew she couldn't hold on much longer. The closeness of Nero, however, was a crushing distraction. Every second felt like an eternity as she watched the lion approach, his body partially submerged but his glowing eyes piercing the surface. Suddenly, Clara was swept away by an even stronger current, her body spinning violently. A scream escaped her lips as she swallowed water, the bitter and suffocating taste invading her throat. She felt completely lost. It was then that Nero acted. With a powerful leap, the lion dove toward her, and Clara felt something solid and surprisingly warm brush against her leg. When she opened her eyes, she saw Nero swimming beside her, his soaked mane glistening under the fading rays of the sun. Too weak to fight any longer, Clara hesitantly grabbed the lion's mane, disbelief written all over her face. Nero didn't flinch or show discomfort. On the contrary, he adjusted his movements to keep her above the surface. The strength with which he swam was astonishing, every motion calculated to counter the current. Clara could hardly believe what was happening. It was as if, in that moment, the lion had decided she wasn't just an intruder in his territory, but someone in need of his help. When they finally reached a shallower part of the river, Clara felt the ground beneath her feet. She staggered to the shore, collapsing to her knees, gasping for air. She turned her head, searching for Nero, but he was already emerging from the water. The lion paused for a moment, shook his drenched mane, and cast one last glance at Clara before disappearing into the trees. She remained there, in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Terror still pulsed through her veins, but at the same time, a strange sense of gratitude began to form. Nero wasn't just the king of the jungle. On that day, he had become the unlikely guardian of her life. The silence that took over the shore was almost surreal. Clara was still kneeling, feeling her body shake. The wind swayed the trees around her, but it seemed there was no sound at all, except for her heavy breathing. She looked back at the river, as if expecting to see Nero reappear, but the water flowed calmly, as if what had just happened was nothing but a daydream. Her fingers were still trembling, and her confused mind struggled to understand how a lion, a natural predator, had become her savior. When she managed to stand up, her legs gave way. She was soaked, her clothes sticking to her body, and her backpack finally slipped off her shoulders, falling with a muffled sound onto the sand. She tried to find a point of reference to understand where she was, but everything around her looked the same. Tall trees, thick bushes, and a vast stretch of land that revealed no signs of her safari group. Clara realized that, even though she had survived the river, she was still alone in the middle of the savannah. A sense of alertness took over her. The adrenaline that had kept her alive began to fade, but now another fear emerged. She knew dusk was approaching, and the savannah at night was an even more dangerous place. The safari guide always repeated, "If you get lost, never stop walking. Look for tracks or signs of civilization." Clara decided to follow the advice, even though each step was a monumental effort. The image of Nero, however, remained etched in her mind. Why hadn't he attacked her? Why had he helped her? As she walked, Clara heard a snap between the bushes. Her body froze instantly. She held her breath, trying to listen more carefully, but the following silence was even more terrifying. Could it be another predator? Her eyes scanned the surrounding vegetation, and her heart felt like it was about to leap out of her chest. When the sound repeated, she took a step back, stumbling. That's when the movement among the leaves revealed a familiar figure. Nero. He was there again, watching her, as if he had followed every step she took. Clara felt a mix of relief and fear upon seeing him. She wasn't sure if he was still protecting her or just guarding his territory. Even so, something inside her told her not to run. Instead, she kept her gaze fixed on the lion and spoke, almost like a whisper, "Are you still here?" Nero didn't move, but his eyes glowed in the growing twilight, as if he were waiting for something. Then, as if it were a signal, Clara realized he had started walking in front of her. His steps slow and steady, as though indicating the way. Clara hesitated for a moment, watching Nero with a mixture of disbelief and caution. The lion, imposing and silent, walked ahead of her, his heavy steps echoing through the savannah as the shadows of the night began to stretch. The cool night breeze started to blow, and Clara felt the weight of exhaustion settle over her body. She knew that if she didn't follow Nero, the night in the savannah would be unforgiving. But his presence made her uneasy, as if he were both a protector and an imminent danger. With every step she took, Clara looked around, waiting for something that could appear at any moment. The crackling of vegetation and the distant hum of insects filled the air, but the feeling of loneliness and vulnerability never left her. Nero, with his calm demeanor, seemed at ease in the darkness, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Clara tried to keep pace with him, but her tired feet stumbled occasionally, reminding her of the seriousness of the situation. She was still lost, with no signs of human life in sight. As they walked, Clara couldn't help but think about the lion. How could he, such a wild creature, be so careful? There was something almost human in his posture, in the way he guided her through the savannah. Was he really trying to help her, or was he simply watching her as he would any other living being that dared to enter his territory? She didn't know what to think. But one thing was certain. The lion had saved her from the current, and now he seemed to be her only hope of making it out of this unforgiving land alive. At every bend of the trail, the scenery changed, but Nero kept leading, always ahead of Clara. The sparser trees gave way to an open plain, lit only by the faint light of the crescent moon. The ground was more arid here, with dry bushes and yellowed grass. Clara could still feel the heat of the day radiating from the earth, although the cool night breeze offered some relief. The savannah now seemed like an endless expanse, but somehow, the lion's presence made her feel less alone. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Nero stopped. Clara almost didn't notice, her muscles tense, but when she looked ahead, she realized the lion was staring at something. He had found a point of reference. Clara took a step forward, her eyes following the lion's line of sight. In the distance, something began to take shape in the darkness. A wooden cabin, a shelter. The hope Clara had lost seemed, at last, to appear before her. Clara felt a breath of relief when she spotted the cabin in the distance, but her caution didn't fade. The savannah was still relentless and unpredictable, and Nero, who had guided her there, remained silent. He didn't seem to care about the cabin ahead. To him, it was just another point along the way. But for Clara, that small shelter represented her chance for survival. She approached cautiously, feeling the weight of each step, as if fate were granting her one last opportunity. As she got closer to the cabin, Clara noticed it was old and neglected. The wood was worn, the windows dirty and broken, and the roof looked like it might collapse under the weight of time. But what mattered now wasn't the condition of the place, but the fact that it was a refuge. She looked at Nero, still standing a few meters behind, watching her intently. Something in his gaze seemed to say that, unlike her, he didn't feel the need for shelter. He had done his part and now seemed ready to move on alone. Clara hesitated, but as she looked at the cabin's entrance, a sense of urgency took over her. The sky was already darkening deeply, and she knew that the night in the savannah was too dangerous to spend exposed. Without another word, she entered, trying to ignore the discomfort the place gave her. The door creaked but opened with effort. Inside, the air was heavy and musty, but it was still a relief to her exhausted body. The dirt floor was covered with dry leaves and broken wood pieces, but the shelter was better than nothing. Clara collapsed to the ground, her legs trembling from exhaustion, while she gazed out the broken window. Nero was still there, standing, watching the cabin as if making sure she was safe, or maybe, as if he was waiting for something. Clara couldn't understand, but the connection between them seemed deeper than she had imagined. It was as if he had an intuitive understanding of the situation. The lion, with his calm presence, was the only living being she shared this moment of uncertainty with. Suddenly, the silence was broken by the sound of footsteps. Clara instinctively stood up, her body tense, but soon realized it wasn't Nero. The sound was coming from outside, nearby, as if someone was approaching the cabin. Her heightened senses went on alert. Who else could be out there in the savannah at this hour of the night? And, more importantly, would it be someone friendly, or another danger waiting to emerge from the shadows? What do you think is about to happen to Clara in the cabin? Who's approaching? Will it be an ally or another threat? Leave your thoughts in the comments below and share your theories with us. I love reading what you think about every twist in this story. The sound of approaching footsteps grew louder, and Clara's heart raced. She silently moved toward the broken window, peering through the shards of glass, trying to make out who was outside. The darkness of the night made it hard to see clearly, but a figure began to take shape as it got closer to the cabin. The air was thick with tension, and Clara held her breath, unsure if the visitor would be a threat or a chance to escape her desperate situation. The figure appeared human, but its rigid posture and the way it moved quickly, as if in a hurry, made Clara doubt. Was it a lost hunter? Or someone even more dangerous, wandering the savannah at night? The uncertainty consumed her, and she knew she couldn't ignore what was happening. Any movement could be a fatal mistake. She glanced once more at Nero, hoping for some sign, but the lion was too far away to react. He seemed calm, but his presence was a constant reminder that she wasn't completely alone. The figure finally reached the cabin door, and Clara could barely make out its features through the shadow, but she could feel the tension in the air. The visitor stopped right in front of the entrance and stood still for a few seconds, as if assessing the situation inside the cabin. Clara clenched her fists, knowing that any noise could alert him to her presence. Fear was in every fiber of her being. Who could it be? And why was he there? Suddenly, the figure took a step forward and knocked firmly on the door. The sound of the impact echoed through the cabin, making Clara jump in shock. She hesitated, unsure whether to open the door or stay hidden. Her brain was racing with chaotic thoughts, not knowing what to do. The person on the other side seemed determined, knocking again, harder this time, and the voice that followed was low but clear. "I know you're in there. I'm not here to hurt you. I just need help." Clara froze. The words hung in the air, and her mind swirled with questions. Who was this person? How did they know she was there? What did that cryptic request for help mean? In an almost involuntary movement, she approached the door, but before she could make a decision, she heard a distant roar. Nero was close again, but what would he do? Would the lion come to protect Clara? Or was this mysterious figure the key to her survival? She knew that the choice she made now could change everything. Clara didn't know what to do. The words of the person outside still echoed in her mind. "I need help." There was something in their voice that sounded genuine, but in a situation like this, no one could be trusted so easily. She stepped away from the door, trying to control the whirlwind of emotions taking over her body. The knocking continued, but the distant roar of Nero made her look out the broken window again. The lion was closer now, its eyes glowing in the darkness, as if waiting for something. It was there, ready to protect, but from who? And why was it so close? The tension was palpable. Clara knew that if she opened the door, it could be her chance to find someone who would help her escape the savannah, or she might be granting access to a new enemy. The questions tormented her, but one thing was certain. She was alone and desperate. The sound of Nero's roar seemed farther away now, as if he was leaving. But would he leave her? Or was he just watching the situation? Clara took a deep breath, deciding she couldn't wait any longer. With sweaty palms and a mind full of doubt, she went to the door and opened it slowly. On the other side, a man appeared, with a tired expression and a certain urgency in his eyes. He wore worn clothes and his face was covered in dirt. But what caught Clara's attention most were the visible signs of exhaustion in his posture. It was clear that he, like her, was in trouble. "I saw you by the riverbank," he said, his voice hoarse and low. "You're lost, aren't you?" "I'm stuck here too." Clara watched him cautiously. It was hard to trust anyone in this place, but her hope for a chance to survive made her voice falter as she tried to respond. "I don't know where to go anymore," he said, looking over his shoulder as if he feared being followed. "The safari, the people I was with, they're gone. I'm the only one left." He seemed genuine, but Clara felt that something wasn't right. The fear came rushing back, but she couldn't retreat anymore. He was there, in front of her, and a decision had to be made. She took a step away from the door, but the man, noticing her hesitation, stepped forward. "You're not alone. I can help you." Clara found herself in a dilemma. Her life was at risk, and the man in front of her seemed to be in the same situation. But what about Nero? She didn't want to risk losing the protection the lion offered her. She looked toward the darkness where Nero was still hiding, his eyes shining. The feeling of being caught between two dangerous choices consumed her. But she had to choose. With one last glance at the lion, Clara stepped out of the cabin, her eyes fixed on the stranger. But what she didn't know was that, by doing so, she was walking into a dangerous game that would lead her deeper into the savanna, where the secrets and threats were greater than anything she could have imagined. As Clara took the first step out of the cabin, she felt a wave of uncertainty. The night was thicker now, with a chilling stillness hanging in the air. The man in front of her seemed restless. His brown eyes locked on her with a look that blended fear and something else. "Let's go," he said, his voice trembling. "I know a path around here. We'd better move quickly, or the darkness will swallow us." He turned quickly and started walking, not waiting for a response. Clara hesitated, the weight of the decision still paralyzing her, but she knew there was no time to lose. She followed him, her heart racing, each step making her more aware of the looming danger. The landscape around them seemed to grow even more threatening as they moved forward. The savanna, once an open field, was now turning into a maze of dry trees and thorny bushes. Clara looked back one last time, but Nero was no longer in sight. The distance between them seemed to have widened, and she didn't know whether the lion had left her behind or if he was simply lurking, waiting for the right moment. The feeling of solitude returned, stronger than ever. The man beside her continued walking without stopping, as though he knew exactly where he was going. But Clara couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something. "Who else is here?" Clara suddenly asked, her voice low but filled with suspicion. The man glanced quickly at her, his eyes blinking with a hint of surprise. He seemed to hesitate, as if weighing his response, before answering. "No one else. I told you I'm the only one. Everyone's dead, Clara." He said her name with a strange intimacy, as if he had known it from somewhere. The tone of his voice, soft but forced, made Clara's stomach churn. How did he know her name? And why couldn't she remember telling him? The doubt grew, but she stayed silent, trying not to show the fear now consuming every cell of her body. As they continued walking, the sound of the man's footsteps seemed to blend with the distant noise of the savanna. The wind began to pick up, and the air turned colder, as if nature itself was warning them of something. Clara looked at the sky, but the moon was hidden behind thick clouds. The feeling of being watched intensified, and she couldn't help but think of Nero. Where was he now? She wished the lion were nearby, like a guardian keeping her safe. But there was no turning back. Moving forward was the only option, no matter how terrified it made her. Suddenly, the man stopped walking and turned around, locking eyes with Clara. The look he gave her was different now, more intense, and his voice deepened. "I didn't lie about what happened to the others," he said, his breath growing heavier. "But you need to understand that there's something else. Something you haven't seen here, Clara. Something that's hunting us." The air around them seemed to chill even more with his words, and Clara felt a shiver run down her spine. What was he implying? The idea of being hunted, by whoever or whatever, terrified her more than she could admit. She tried to speak, but her voice failed her. Fear was taking over, and the game they were now playing seemed deadlier with every passing second. The silence that followed the man's words was deep and oppressive. Clara felt the weight of those words still reverberating in her mind. Something is hunting us. The idea of being hunted, of being watched by something unknown and deadly, made her heart race. She looked around, her eyes scanning every shadow, every sound in the air, as if it were possible to see the danger lurking. But there was nothing visible, only the dense darkness of the savanna and the soft sound of the wind rustling the dry leaves. Clara wanted to ask more. She wanted to understand. But the man in front of her seemed absorbed in his own thoughts, as if he were waiting for something. "You don't understand, do you?" the man said finally, his voice low and tense. He seemed more uncomfortable now, his body stiff, as if something was about to happen. Clara wanted to respond, but something stopped her. The feeling that they were being watched grew even stronger, as if the very savanna were on alert, ready to swallow everything around them. The man glanced back quickly, as if he had heard something Clara hadn't noticed. "We don't have much time," he murmured, and without another word, he began walking faster, forcing Clara to match his pace. As they ran over the rough terrain, Clara couldn't stop questioning the reality of the situation. Who was this man? Why did he seem to know so much about her and what was happening in the savannah? Fear swallowed her, but her curiosity also pushed her forward. Each step seemed to take her deeper into unfamiliar territory, where the danger wasn't just in the people around her, but in everything around her. She felt as though she was entering a nightmare she couldn't wake up from. With each turn, the terrain became more difficult, more wild. The bushes closed in around them, and Clara could barely see the path ahead. The man in front of her seemed more confident, his steps quick and sure, while Clara almost tripped over her own feet. The fear of the darkness and whatever might be lurking there made her disoriented. "Where are we going?" she asked, her voice tense. The man looked at her but didn't answer right away. He stopped briefly, as if considering his words, before looking toward the horizon. "We have to get there before dawn, or we won't have another chance." A chill ran down Clara's spine when she heard those words. Something else was going on, and the urgency in the man's eyes didn't seem to be just fear. It was something deeper, something Clara couldn't fully understand but sensed. They were being hunted, yes, but what was the hunter? And, more importantly, what would happen if they didn't get there before dawn? Panic started to take over her, and even though she knew she needed to stay calm, every muscle in her body was tense, ready to flee, but without knowing where to or what she was afraid of. The sound of hurried footsteps echoed in the darkness, and Clara felt the weight of the unknown pressing on her mind with each passing second. She could barely keep up with the pace, her body exhausted and her breath heavy. The man in front of her seemed immune to fatigue, his steps quick and firm, as if he were being guided by something beyond reason. Clara couldn't stop thinking about what he had said. "We have to get there before dawn," but where was this place? And what would happen if they didn't arrive in time? The questions haunted her, and the fear of what lay ahead made her lose all sense of time and space. Suddenly, the man stopped abruptly. Clara, lost in her thoughts, almost bumped into him. She looked ahead but saw nothing but darkness and trees. The path ahead was hidden. "We're here," he said, his voice deep, almost as if he were speaking to himself. What did he mean by here? What was so important about this place that it needed to be reached before dawn? Clara tried to force her eyes to make out something, but all she could see was the vast, dark expanse of the savannah, as impenetrable as her own thoughts. The man began to move again, this time slower, as if he were waiting for something. Clara followed him but couldn't understand why he seemed so calm now. Something was wrong. She stopped, her senses alert, and looked around, but saw nothing. "What's happening?" she asked, almost in a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. He just raised his hand, signaling for silence. Clara felt a shiver of fear. The wind stopped. The sounds of the night ceased. There was no more noise, only the beating of her racing heart. That's when she heard it. A low, guttural sound, like a distant roar, but at the same time, close. Clara quickly turned her head, her eyes widening as she tried to understand where the sound was coming from. The man was standing still, his body tense, his eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. "This is it," he finally said, his voice now just a whisper. "What's hunting us?" The feeling of being watched grew stronger, and Clara felt her stomach churn. Something was out there, lurking, ready to attack. But what was it? An animal? A human? Or something even darker? The man pulled Clara back, moving her away from the center of the path, and they crouched, hiding among the dry bushes and trees. Clara dared not breathe. She could feel her own fear pulsing through her veins. The roar grew louder now, closer, and Clara had the sense that the hunter was nearer than ever. But she didn't know what to expect. Whatever was behind that sound was about to reveal itself. And Clara, with her heart pounding in her chest like a drum, knew that the fight for survival was far from over. Chapter 11. The silence in the savannah was absolute, the tension in the air unbearable. Clara and the man were crouched between the trees, practically motionless, as if any movement could alert the creature hunting them. The sound of distant roars grew louder, each one more intense, and Clara felt her entire body vibrate with fear. Whatever was lurking, the feeling that it was near was undeniable. She squinted, trying to spot any movement in the darkness, but the night seemed to swallow everything around them. The man beside her was tense, his eyes fixed on the horizon, waiting for the thing that was about to emerge. Suddenly, the roar grew closer, louder. It was as if the creature was right behind them, watching, waiting for the right moment to strike. Clara felt the air around her turn cold, and her breath became heavy, as though the fear was suffocating her. The man made a quick gesture, signaling for her to remain silent. They were so close to danger that she could almost feel it, a dark, threatening presence. Clara could hardly believe what was about to happen. She knew this was the moment. Then, what appeared to be a shadow moved quickly in front of them. It was a massive figure, shaped like a lion, but larger and more menacing than anything Clara had ever seen before. Its eyes glowed in the darkness, fixed directly on Clara, as if it recognized her. She froze, unsure whether to run or stay still, but the man beside her didn't hesitate. He suddenly stood up, heading straight for the lion. "Go, run!" he shouted at Clara, but she was frozen, unable to move a muscle, her mind a whirlwind of panic. The lion, instead of attacking, stared at the man with an intensity that Clara couldn't understand. She saw something in the animal's gaze, a familiarity, a deep recognition, before it slowly began to move away, as if accepting something that had happened. Clara, still paralyzed by fear, finally found the strength to move and headed toward the man. Together, they quickly made their way toward the place where night was beginning to give way to the light of dawn. The hunter had been challenged, but Clara didn't know what that meant for their future. All she knew was that, in that moment, something had changed. If you enjoyed this adventure, don't forget to subscribe to the channel now. Every day there's a new story filled with emotion and surprises you won't want to miss. So, don't miss any part of this incredible journey, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell to be the first to know when a new video is live.